Luanda, Angola, Africa, May 25th, 2003. Air traffic controllers at the Quatro de Fevereiro International Airport in Luanda, Angola, were going about their shifts just before sunset. What would happen next would persist as one of the most intriguing aviation mysteries of the modern age. The controllers noticed a Boeing 727-223 taxiing out onto the runway with its lights off. Air traffic tried to contact the airliner to find out why they were taxiing onto the runway and that they were not cleared for takeoff. However, they got no answer. The Boeing 727 would then take off from Luanda towards the Atlantic Ocean, never to be seen again. What happened that day on May 25th? What was the story leading up to this fateful day that included the theft of this aircraft, and the subsequent disappearance of it as well, and the motives of the men who stole it? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, we fly ourselves into a relatively unknown mystery to the general public that still remains unsolved to this day in the 2003 Luanda airplane theft. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and I wanted to take another pivot for this week's episode. Obviously, I try to keep everything new, refreshed, and that I'm not covering the same thing every week, and it's been a very long time since we've covered a aviation mystery. So that kind of motivated me to dig into this specific topic for this week, and for this episode, I've decided to go back down this route of a strange disappearance. And there's also a little bit of a sprinkle of true crime in there. Obviously, the more episodes I do with true crime, the more I seem to enjoy them, and the more I seem to go down the rabbit hole of them. So if you notice that I seem to put out a little bit more true crime than normal, bear with me because I really like doing them. But if you do want to hear something different other than that, or if you want to hear something that's maybe a little bit different and not always true crime and not always this or whatever, but please let me know, and I'm more than willing to change it up. However, I chose this topic for this week. It's a very, very interesting one. And now, before researching this topic, I had honestly never heard of it. And I feel like I'm saying that quite a bit with, when I cover any sort of aviation-related disappearances and stories of the sort, because people really haven't really heard about these, and I haven't heard about a lot of these. Now, with that being said, and not really hearing about aviation-related disappearances and mysteries, now I could put two and two together with this and make the assumption that large-scale aviation companies maybe try their best to bury these stories for propaganda reasons, but that is merely me just taking a shot in the dark, and that's neither here nor there. But what I am going to do is tell you maybe look into the Boeing whistleblower that just came forward and was also just found dead by a quote-unquote self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, does that have anything to do with today's topic? No, not at all. It has nothing to do with today's topic. However, I want to throw that out there because that is a developing story that is very, very interesting, and maybe when there's more information about it in the future, I will do an episode on it. However, very, very strange. But like I said, that is not today's topic, so I will just leave that right there for everyone to personally look into. Now, before we dive into the story today, let's give a little background as to where this story takes place. Now, Luanda is located right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in the country of Angola. It also happens to be Angola's capital. The city center happens to be quite modern compared to the outskirts and the rest of Angola. Now, Luanda was established in 1576 and was settled by the Portuguese, and remained under Portuguese control until 1975, when Angola was granted independence from Portugal. However, during the Portuguese' control of Angola, Luanda was used as a significant hub of slave trading from Brazil. Now, Luanda's population grew exponentially after gaining independence from Portugal, as that would send the country into a civil war for roughly 27 years, with that Angolan civil war ending in 2002. Because of this, like I said, Luanda's population grew as many fled to the city to try and get away from the conflict that was happening in the rural areas of Angola. Now, Luanda had a hard time with these massive influx of people and how to handle them, and really how to just take care of them, as they didn't really have the necessities or the housing to support this. Now, they had difficulties getting drinking water, they had problems with sewage treatment and trash collection in the city because just so many new people were coming into the city. Now, the city was prone to frequent outbreaks of cholera due to the city's water problem, and however, even because this town has had so much problems with this, it has still been able to maintain its status of a large city and capital because of its exports. Now, like I mentioned, it is a large industrial hub that produces an excess amount of automobile parts and also cement, but it also farms quite a bit of sugarcane, coffee, and cotton. Now that I've given you a little background about where this story takes place, most notably what the city was like in the early 2000s, of course, now let's dive into the story of the airliner theft. Now, at the Quatro de Fevereiro International Airport sat a Boeing 727-223 with a tail number of N844AA. Now, this plane originally had served with American Airlines and had the original paint scheme on it as well at the time, which was silver with red and blue stripes and American in red font above the windows. Now, at this time, the plane was not flying with American Airlines, but rather leased by a company known as Aerospace Sales and Leasing, which is based out of Miami, Florida, with the original owner being a man named Maury Joseph. So, with that being said, why was this plane in Angola? Now, Maury Joseph had leased the plane out to a South African businessman known as Keith Irwin. Now, Keith's intent for this plane was to use it to haul diesel fuel to diamond mines in Angola. Now, if you don't know anything about how prolific the diamond mining industry is in Africa, and the wars that have been fought and the blood that has been spilled over it, just Google blood diamonds, and that'll give you pretty much a whole rundown about all of that. Now, Keith Irwin had proceeded to rip out much of the interior of this plane, like most of the seats and much of the interior accessories, so that he could fit large diesel storage tanks inside of the plane. Irwin only used the plane for a short period of time before he stopped paying his payments and actually defaulted on it. Since Irwin defaulted on his payments, the plane's ownership shifted back to Maury Joseph, who wanted to get the plane back in flying shape, as it had been months since it last flew. And then this would be when Maury Joseph would now sell the plane back to a different buyer in South Africa. Determined to get the plane back in tip-top shape, Maury Joseph would hire a small crew to help fix up the plane. 2 members of the crew would include Ben Padilla, who was hired to be the flight engineer. He was also a licensed aircraft mechanic, and he was also certified to fly smaller aircraft, but nothing as big as the Boeing 727. Now, he was also going to be in charge of hiring the pilot and co-pilot of the plane when they would fly it to its new buyer in South Africa. Padilla was also from Pensacola, Florida, and had a family back home. Now, Ben Padilla would also go on to hire a mechanic by the name of John Mikel Mutanto, who was from the Republic of Congo. Now, Padilla, Mutanto, and the rest of the hired crew had worked together to return the plane into flying shape, like I had previously mentioned. 2 days before the plane was scheduled to depart from Luanda, it was parked in the hangars and filled with 14,000 gallons of A1 jet fuel, enough to travel roughly 1,500 miles. Now, it is clear in 2003, these planes did not get very good gas mileage, because that is a lot of gas for not a very far distance. Now, an Air Gemini crew was later hired to fly the plane out of Luanda on May 26th, 2003. However, when May 26th came around, there was no plane to be found. Now, on May 25th, Padilla and Mutantu were both last seen going into the plane. It obviously closed its doors, taxied out onto the runway, not responding to air traffic control, and took off, never to be seen again. Now, when this happened, it spooked a lot of people, especially within the US government. This incident happened obviously close in proximity to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and the intel community started searching everywhere they could find to try and figure out where this plane could have gone off to, and whether or not it was going to be used for sinister purposes like another terrorist attack. The airstrip at the Luanda airport does point towards the Atlantic Ocean, but it's very reasonable to think that the plane could have also turned around and landed somewhere in Africa. There are numerous unpaved runways throughout Africa that could accommodate a plane of the Boeing 727 size. However, I think it's more important to note that at this point, it wasn't the first time that a Boeing 727 had gone missing. In September of 1990, a Fawcett, Peru Boeing 727 was coming back to Peru after it had been leased throughout the summer to Air Malta. The flight had a Peruvian-based crew, and because the airliner didn't have the fuel capacity to go straight from Malta to Peru, it took several stops to refuel. Once in Milan, once in London, then in Keflavik, Iceland, then to Gander, Newfoundland, Canada, then to Miami, and then to Lima, Peru. However, the plane would not make it to Gander, Newfoundland. However, unlike the Luanda flight, it is widely considered and believed that this plane had some sort of mechanical emergency and flew off course and crashed somewhere in the North Atlantic between the Newfoundland and upper east coast of the United States. There is still some mystery as to what could have happened to this flight and whether or not this was some sort of mechanical failure or what caused it to extremely drift off course, but that remains more clear-cut than the Luanda flight. Now, obviously, I mentioned this to kind of add a little bit of perspective as well as, you see in the news now a lot of things that are going on with Boeing. In the beginning, I mentioned the Boeing whistleblower. Obviously, I'm not going to go into that in today's episode, obviously, because that's not today's topic. But this was not the first time that a Boeing 727 had gone missing, so it wasn't exactly unheard of for these planes to go missing. However, this still raised alarm bells considerably when this plane disappeared. Now, there are many theories as to what happened to the Boeing 727 in Luanda. But before we get into those theories, I want to share a piece of information I found in doing my research for this week's episode, and that is an email shared by Ben Padilla's brother, Joseph Padilla Sr., to the FAA's International Aviation Safety Assessment Program. Now, in the subject line of this email states, "Missing Boeing 727 plane from Angola on May 25th, 2003. Now, the email states the following. I am Joseph B. Padilla Sr. I live in Pensacola, Florida, USA. I am the brother of Ben Charles Padilla Jr. He is suspected to be the pilot of the missing Boeing 727 plane that left the airport in Angola on May 25th, 2003. I am trying to reach news organizations to help me locate anyone that has seen or heard anything about this missing plane or my brother. I appeared on ABC's Good Morning America, along with my sister, Benita Padilla Kirkland, on June 19th, 2003, in hopes to get the story out and to locate my brother. We both also appeared on CNN's morning show, American Morning, on June 24th, 2003. Can you please help me by broadcasting a story or by your website, news, or newspaper? I have a lot of information about the disappearance of the plane and my brother. You can contact me at blank, I'm not going to list his actual phone number, or by email, blank@cox.net. I'm not going to disclose his email either, just for privacy purposes. However, you can find that on the internet. Not telling you to go find it, but you can find it. The email continues with, I hope that you will give me your help in hopes that someone seeing the story will either know something about the disappearance of the plane and my brother, or knows someone that does. Here is what I have so far about the story. As in the beginning, as I told ABC News on the Good Morning America show that I had appeared on in New York, I thought that the Boeing 727 plane had been sitting there in Angola for 14 months unattended to and not maintained. Now I have found out that my brother, Ben Charles Padilla Jr., had been in Angola for 2 months, overseeing a crew of aircraft mechanics reworking the plane from one end to the other. A B check was done and it was found out to be fine. I talked to the owner of the plane, Mr. Maury Joseph, which is the owner of Aerospace Sales and Leasing in South Florida. I too live in Florida, Pensacola, Florida, and my brother too was born and raised here. Maury Joseph told me that he was there in Angola 2 weeks before the disappearance to see how things were going with the rebuild of the 727, and also talked to my brother 2 days before the plane became missing, and that he had sent my brother $43,000 for him to pay the fees to the airport there in Angola. My brother paid the airport and faxed Maury Joseph the receipt. This is what Maury Joseph told me this past Friday night during our 2.5-hour phone conversation. My brother was also in charge of the hiring of a pilot and co-pilot. He was to be the flight engineer for the flight out of Angola for the repossession of the Boeing 727 plane. My brother is not licensed to fly a 727 and has never flown an aircraft this large. He is a licensed aircraft mechanic, flight engineer, and pilot of smaller airplanes. I was told that he had to take the plane out to the end of the runway and ran the engines up to check to see how they performed. I feel that when my brother was checking the engines, someone was on the plane and hijacked him. My brother isn't a criminal, nor has never done any wrongdoings. Maury Joseph told me that he trusts my brother and doesn't believe the reports of my brother stealing the plane. Maury Joseph also told me that he had talked to the airport there in Angola and had found out that the control tower had radioed the 727 and told them as they were headed out off to the runway to take off that they didn't have clearance nor permission to take off, and the tower never received a response from the 727. I talked to my brother, Ben Padilla Jr., back in either January or February, and we had talked about the September 11th, 2001 ordeal, and he himself told me that if this sort of thing ever happened to him, that he would down the plane in a New York second. So, with that said, I really believed my brother was hijacked and taken prisoner and held against his will and possibly was killed. My mother had a heart attack on Mother's Day, and my brother was emailed about this, and he responded to the email he received from another brother of ours and told him that he would contact us as soon as he could, and we haven't heard anything from him. So that tells me that something isn't right, since he would have contacted the family about our mother. I have talked to the FBI and State Department in Washington, D.C., and all they are willing to tell me is that they have not found my brother or the plane. So I am trying to search for any information that I can get through news organizations. I find a lot of stories on the internet and try and get any of the news organizations to run this story. I also include a couple of pictures of my brother, so in case anyone knows anything or has seen him before, to please contact me. I am including in this email 2 pictures of him in case you run this story, in which I hope you do. I would like to include my email address and phone number in case someone reads or sees this, that they can contact me. My phone number is blank, and my email address is blank@cox.net. Our family has already lost 2 siblings and cannot bear to lose another one. I would appreciate any help you can give me. If you need any additional information, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you so much for your time. Joseph B. Padilla, Sr. Now, that was a very long email, so I do apologize about me droning on. Now, what sticks out most to me in this email is that Maury Joseph, the owner of the leasing company that the plane belongs to, doesn't think that Ben Padilla stole the plane and feels like he's innocent. And his brother and Maury Joseph feel like the plane was hijacked and perhaps the attackers were waiting on the plane already. So that kind of got me wondering, is this kind of thing common in Africa? Would it be reasonable to assume that something like this would happen in that area, or would this be like a 1 in a million type of theory? Now, I found some interesting articles on whether or not this could be the case. Now, for starters, Luanda is not a safe area. It is extremely dangerous and crime is very prevalent. Some of it can even be violent. Most common is theft, which is extremely common, not just common, extremely common. Now, according to gov.uk, their foreign travel advice, they suggest you don't travel alone, be constantly aware of your surroundings, be careful when withdrawing cash from ATMs as you can be followed, as well as also strongly advising not to wear jewelry out in public or use mobile devices, as both can be snatched up rather quickly by thieves. They also say that sexual assault is also very common. So does that mean some brazen thieves could have pulled off the plane heist of a century? Now, like I said, I wanted to research this, and I did, and it wouldn't be the first time that something like this would have been done in Africa. Now, I'm going to give you a couple recent examples, because they happened very, obviously, recently, one in 2024, this year, in January, and one in January of 2022, that were plane heists. Now, in January of 2022, an Air Boeing 737 in Lagos, Nigeria, would be broken into while it was parked overnight at the airport. The thieves had broken into the aircraft and had stolen the flight management system out of the aircraft. Now, these pieces of equipment go for roughly $300,000 brand new as of 2021, and that is just one piece of the plane. And in January of this past year, a British pilot in Johannesburg, South Africa, would be kidnapped, assaulted, and robbed by South African thieves during a stopover. The pilot would be tracked from a store he made a trip to. Now, a woman was used as bait, and she had asked the pilot to help her load some shopping bags into her car when a group of masked men would ambush the pilot and throw him into the car, where he would be brought to an unknown location and tortured until he gave the thieves a huge chunk of his bank account savings. Now, even though this second incident didn't directly involve an airplane, I still felt like it was important and worth noting when it comes to the crimes that take place in Africa regarding the airline industry. Now, also when I was doing some digging, I found out that between November of 1961 to July of 1983, there were 55 hijackings or attempted hijackings of aircraft in Africa. Even though our story takes place in 2003, and some processes were implemented to help stop the theft of aircrafts in African countries, it has clearly not been a foolproof plan. So, where does that bring us? I think that brings us right into the theory section about where this airplane could have gone. Now, the very first theory I have might be the most widely believed one. And obviously, this theory might be the shoe-in, it might be the common sense theory based off the information we have available to us, and that is that Padilla and Mutantu took the plane. Now, like I said, this might seem like the most plausible one, and that is just straight up that Ben Padilla and Mutantu stole the plane for their own personal reasons and maybe intended to sell the plane off for scrap. Now, this theory could be used in two different ways. The first being that Padilla was able to land the plane successfully, even though not having any prior knowledge on how to operate a plane of that size, and was able to disappear after making a fortune off the scrap, or, in an attempt to fly the plane he wasn't familiar with, he crashed it into the Atlantic Ocean, and the wreckage has never been found. Obviously, Padilla's brother and the owner of the plane, Maury Joseph, don't believe Padilla would have stolen the plane. It's still very possible to think that. The allure of wealth can do a lot of different things to people. However, is that allure of wealth enough to leave a family behind back home? That kind of remains uncertain. Now, our second theory is that what Ben Padilla's brother and Maury Joseph thought would happen to the plane, and that was that the plane was hijacked. Now, this theory is that hijackers took control of the plane when Padilla and Mutantu went to go take a look at the airplane on the night of May 25th, where a group of hijackers were already waiting for them on the plane. With the crime that takes place in Luanda in the history of plane theft in Africa, this is pretty believable. Then either the hijackers forced Padilla to fly the plane to a remote location where the hijackers sold it for scrap, and then killed Padilla and Mutantu so they wouldn't get caught. Now, we could also reference the idea that Padilla voluntarily downed the plane, like he mentioned to his brother, and that his brother relayed the email to the FAA. Now, like I said, Padilla's brother in the email said that if he was hijacked or if he was in a position like the pilots were in on September 11th, 2001, with the 9/11 attacks, he would down the plane. He would not risk there being an instance of there being harm brought to other people. Now, if he was hijacked, would it be realistic to assume that he would down the plane? I think it would be. Now, Padilla could have downed this plane somewhere in Africa, but given how it has been 20 years and investigators and people have really found nothing, it seems more probable that if this did happen and that if the plane was hijacked, Padilla would down the craft in the ocean, taking the hijackers and the threat of another terrorist attack down with him. Now, the last theory is one that's a little bit outside of the box, and it is going off of evidence that I haven't really presented yet. And that being the third theory of insurance fraud. Now, our last theory is what if this was a scheme orchestrated by Maury Joseph to try and get an insurance claim to cover the losses he had taken on the plane. Now, what evidence is there to prove this? Well, remember when I mentioned Keith Irwin, the first businessman to lease out the plane in the beginning? Now, when Irwin bought the plane from Maury Joseph, they had come to the price of $1 million for the purchase agreement of the plane. Irwin gave Joseph a $125,000 deposit and told Joseph that he would have the plane paid off in 30 days. And of course, as we've already established, that did not happen. Now, not only did Irwin not pay the rest of the money for the plane, in the time the plane sat vacant at the airport, it had racked up a whopping $4 million in unpaid fees. Investigators initially thought that maybe this could be some sort of insurance scheme that was orchestrated by Maury Joseph. Maybe he had hired Padilla and a team to fix up the aircraft, to make it look like they were fixing it, and then to turn around and stage a plot where Padilla would steal the plane, fly it to a remote location, and stage it to look like hijackers took it, and then maybe get paid an extreme amount of money just so Maury Joseph could recoup his losses. Now, that in and of itself is a very interesting theory. But to add to this, Maury Joseph wasn't a full stranger to fraud, as the Securities and Exchange Commission had actually charged him a few years before this incident with falsifying financial records. However, when asked to take a lie detector test, Maury Joseph did pass, which kind of perplexed everybody. But as we have mentioned before on this show, lie detectors aren't always the best tools to prove guilt or innocence, for that matter. But with that being said, that leads us to my personal theory. Now, as much as I want to think that maybe this is the clean-cut route and that Padilla and Mutantu took the plane just by themselves, I have a very hard time believing that. And me personally, I think the plane was hijacked. And I think that Padilla downed the plane intentionally to prevent the possibility of it being used in a terror attack. Now, obviously, do I think the hijacker's intention was to use the plane in a terrorist attack? Maybe, maybe not. However, that would be impossible to tell. I think odds are that the hijackers would take the plane, with Padilla would fly the plane to a remote location where, like I mentioned in one of my theories, they would sell it for scrap. They would make an absolute fortune. As I mentioned, from the thieves that stole the flight management computer out of the plane in 2022, those are worth $300,000, and that's just one piece of the plane. These planes are worth millions of dollars. If you scrap the whole plane and you sold all the parts on the black market, you could make a fortune. Especially, I don't know in terms of inflation about how much things would be worth compared to 2003 and now. But that is just, if they took the plane and then sold it for scrap, they would make an astronomical amount of money. But I think once Padilla realized he was being hijacked, he's like, I don't want to risk anything. I don't want to take any chances. Took off the aircraft to make it seem like he was going to comply with demands, and then just down the plane in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, with Africa as a whole being prone to crimes and crimes against aircraft, it wouldn't surprise me that maybe a group of thieves were either hired to steal the jet and then sell it to maybe even other members of their gang or other gangs or something like that. But it also wouldn't surprise me that members of maybe the repair crew that were hired by Padilla and maybe knew Mutantu for some reason were tipped off and gave the thieves the information they needed to go in and steal the jet after they had it all fixed up and ready in flying shape. Obviously, they decided that the day before it got shipped off to South America would be the best time to take it, as then they knew that the plane would be ready to fly with little to no errors. To me, that makes the most sense, and that possibly, like I mentioned, somebody in the repair crew tipped off the thieves to say, all right, the plane is in flying shape, you steal it the day before it's slated to fly out, so it has the least possible instance of it having any mechanical issues. You can take it, you can fly off into the sunset, you can sell it for scrap, and then that person who tipped those thieves off got a chunk of a chunk of the money. And then when Padilla and Mutantu went to either do routine maintenance checks or check fuel levels, the hijackers attacked them there and stole the plane. Obviously, you could reach this a little bit further and say that maybe somebody on the repair crew knew that Padilla was the only one who was licensed to fly a plane, and then told the thieves that and said, oh, they're going to check out the plane the night before to make sure everything's squared away for the following day when it departs, and that is your best time to steal the plane. However, you got to sneak onto the plane before they get there. Again, that might be a little bit of the stretched or far-fetched theory. However, I don't think it's as far-fetched as you might think it is. And I'm going to go with that as my theory. Now, please let me know. Do you agree with me on this? Maybe do you think it's just clear-cut? Maybe Padilla and Mutantu just stole the plane and sold it for scrap and fled because they made all this money and so on and so forth. Even though I personally don't believe that, I think that's a little bit hard to say and it's a little bit hard to believe. Let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think happened to the Boeing 727 in Luanda, Angola in 2003. But with that being said, that is going to conclude the meat and potatoes portion of the episode. And at the very end, I like to do my obligatory self-plugs, as I call them. If you are listening to this on Spotify, please turn notifications on. Please like my content. When you turn on notifications, when you push that little bell, you get notified every time I post a new episode. I like to have episodes dropped on Tuesdays. I like that to be my release date, but sometimes with my crazy schedule I might have going on, it might come out later. So please be patient with me when it comes to new episodes. And if you are listening to this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, so you get filled into the loop of everything that I put out there on YouTube. As well, in case you didn't know, you can go ahead and follow me on Instagram, and that is Unblurring the Unknown. On Instagram, you will see the custom cover art I have for this week's episode, as well as any photos and pictures relevant to this week's episode. In addition to that, you can also send me topic suggestions. In case you didn't know, last week's topic was a suggestion. In this coming week, so next week's topic, was a suggestion as well. So, if you were doubting that I take a look at your topic suggestions, I do. I do take them, and I do add them to the queue. So please send me topic suggestions. It helps me out a lot. And you can send those to me on my email, and that is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. You can send those on over to me. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the 2003 Luanda plane theft. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know if you'd heard about this before. And again, this was a very fun episode to research. A little bit of it seems a little vague, but that is only because there really is a lot of question marks that still remain to this whole case, even though it has been 21 years since this has taken place. But I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all next week, and I will see you on the next one.